Okay, awesome. Okay. So just to introduce myself, my name is Zoe Katari. I'm 18 years old. I'm from Bombay, but right now I'm studying in Italy at UWC Adriatic. I'm a senior. I'm very passionate about anti-ableism and accessibility. So currently I'm working on a platform dedicated to building empathy and awareness surrounding disability. It's called ZIAI, and it will be screen shared probably after the questions. Yeah, that's me.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Janani, I'm 15, and I'm really interested in using tech to fight climate change. So I go to the international school in Bangalore, and I've built 2 Chrome extensions that can show you your carbon footprint from your Google Maps or Google Flights trip, and also show you the way to offset it. And I've also recently built a Chrome extension for Amazon that picks out potentially toxic materials in what you're going to buy, and instead recommends sustainable products that you can buy apart from Amazon.
I'm a huge fan of both these projects, so that's really cool. We got accessibility, we got climate change, giving me hope for the future.
Perfect. Let's get started, so yeah.
Okay, cool. So the first question. So you're a very successful woman in tech and in STEM. Do you have any advice for young women looking to study and work in male-dominated fields, especially fields with a boys' club culture?
Yeah, I do. So, one thing I would say is that there's so many things that are great about working in tech. And I think the projects that both of you outlined are a perfect example of that. So just stay focused on the power of what you're doing and the joy, and it's easy to let things be a distraction that that aren't the work itself. And so when I think too much about what's going on in the office, and there's a dynamic that's really troubling, and I'm not saying you can always just like put on a happy face and ignore it there. But as you're dealing with things that are really challenging, if they come up, make sure that, one, what they call self-care or whatever, is just to reconnect to the work and realize that's what, originally drew you to the space and is what you're passionate about. Another is to find ways to enjoy, like, I really enjoy working with all my male colleagues. I think it's fun to, like, I love hanging out with nerds, So, I mean, so I would say, one thing is just like in all aspects, remember why you're here. Another thing, when things go wrong, or when someone has really hurt me, which doesn't happen a lot, but happens, I try to find ways to let that also motivate me. So Ellen says, like, my haters are my motivators. Anytime I had a professor in college who I thought was really underestimating me in a way that, was really hurting me, I decided to let that energy fuel me. It was like, well, now I have to show him, So I think finding ways to realize that, there can be a certain energy in the revenge of being a success. And there can be a certain fuel of energy from the revenge of living your best life. I think a kind of spiteful revenge is like, that's kind of a mental poison that's not good to dwell on. But the kind of revenge that says, like, you can do and say what you want, but I'm still living my best life here, that can be a positive fuel that drives you forward. I think sometimes my teaching career I've thought of as a kind of revenge fantasy against the way I was taught. A lot of the classes that I had, I think the professor's mentality was, I'm gonna set up all these roadblocks and hope that most of the class fails. And, by the end, there will be these few bedraggled survivors of what I've set up, as far as workload and exams in this course. And then we'll celebrate, with those few successful. And, and I was a good student. So I often was one of those that made it through. And then at the end, when the professor kind of, I think, wanted to say like, and now we're buddies, right? And I felt like, no, we're not friends. You were just really mean to me and you did a bad job teaching. You didn't actually teach at all. You just tried to weed people out, so I was very angry about that approach, that instead of saying, as a teacher, my job is to build people up and impart skills to them and create experiences where they can maximize their growth and potential, where it just felt like we were succeeding in spite of that way we were taught. I was angry about that. And so I thought, what's the best revenge is just to go out there and show everyone that there's a different way and that my students can be just as competitive out there after my class, but having an experience that's a lot more supportive. So those are the kinds of, pivoting to take anything that goes wrong. And the last piece of advice I would say is network with people who will support you. Find your group of like-minded friends, whether they're other women in tech or, just males who like really believe in you also. And because that's what you need if you ever need to leave a bad situation, right? So making sure that you always have, like an exit plan can take a lot of the stress out. And so like in Silicon Valley, there's people say you should have like this fund, which is like, so many months that you could support yourself if you just had to quit your job because something, went really awry. And that's a luxury, but we do, or sometimes are afforded some luxuries in this industry, but knowing you could do that makes every day a lot less stressful.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I like what you said about using the hate to motivate you, sort of like a backstory. Sorry, I'm a little bit of a Marvel nerd, so like sort of like a backstory. But yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I thought it was really amazing, like how you took your bad experiences and used it to improve your style of teaching. That was really cool. All right, so how do you address microaggressions in a classroom? Like, for example, if a girl is being congratulated on simply doing well as a girl, like, oh, you're the best girl, rather than just a student. And does it happen often?
Yeah. So, oh, my cat would like to say hello. Say hi. Okay. So he just jumped on the table. So microaggressions in the classroom. I would say the most common form that I see is, and there's something, I imagine this happens in classrooms on any subject, but I think there is something about the culture of computer science and coding that makes it feel like it happens a lot more in our classrooms, which is the question that's not actually a question. It's just wanting to show off, that you know something. So it's actually one of my coworkers, Mehran Sahami, who I believe has been a speaker for this as well, had this great practice that he passed on, which is that as an instructor, he'll respond by first saying, hey, to the rest, before I answer that question, I just want to say to the rest of the class that those 10, jargon words that you just heard, they're not part of the vocabulary of this class. If you don't know what those words mean, you're not behind. And then, provide a very quick answer to the question, and then mostly say, like, we can talk about that after class. But there does seem to be this kind of, it reminds me of like birds, showing off their tail feathers, like these kind of displays of, conspicuous nerdery that, taken in the right spirit, I guess, can be kind of fun, but when you're just starting out, can be very deflating if you're a student in the class and you hear what is, your competition or your fellow student appears to know much more than you do. It can be the kind of thing that can shut down a student's self-confidence. And I have to say, as an instructor, it's rarely true that the person doing that kind of thing actually is more talented in the class. Like, I don't only see what's being said in the classroom, I also see the grade book behind the scenes, and I can tell you that those kind of showing off questions are not correlated with the numbers. So just a little heads up if you ever encounter that kind of behavior in class. Don't let it get to you, but there is a role for instructors to play also to, as Mehran set that good example of showing leadership in clarifying for the whole audience that's not really necessary. So
That's super cool. Thank you for the heads up. And in general, just like doing that seems really nice to your students. So the next question. So in your Vox article responding to the infamous Google memo, you write about women with the potential to work in tech being chased away from tech by sociological and other factors, which there's no denying that that's true. What would you say would be the most promising solution or method to dismantle the system within the field of tech?
Great question. One thing I would just say, it's not a specific solution, but more sort of a way of thinking about categories of solutions. And that is that there's sort of a category of solution that says, let's run workshops for women. Let's, give trainings. Let's talk to women about things like imposter syndrome, which is where you think, that you don't really belong, and there's this constant fear that you're going to be found out and exposed as like someone who doesn't know what they're doing, which, by the way, like, everyone feels like they don't know what they're doing all the time, so you're not an imposter. But so that's sort of one category solution, is basically let's fix the women. So somehow like build a stronger armor around them so they can go into spaces that are challenging. And, and I've gained personally from efforts like that, and I think they have their place, but I don't think that the solution, the problem will ever fully go away until we look at a category of solution, which is let's fix the environment. So, instead of saying, well, we'll just, make like little coats that ducks can wear so that they're safe from oil spills. Maybe it's like, maybe we shouldn't spill oil in the water, So, so I think organizations, since the Me Too movement, have been taking more seriously the responsibility to get out truly toxic individuals, which, are a tiny minority of the workforce, the kind of men who would aggressively harass women and that kind of thing. But it only takes a tiny minority, but it was very prolific tiny minority in the how they bother people to cause a real problem. So I think that new willingness and assertiveness on the part of organizations to remove people that are causing a problem is just as important as adding more women. So I think that's what I'd like to see more of is fewer let's run a coding camp for 12-year-old girls, and more let's evaluate how we choose people for promotions to higher executive positions within our company to make sure that women are being promoted, equally. And so I think, women are smart. We know a good thing when we see it. So I think if tech is able to make itself a good thing, there will be that natural draw. So, and I would say like all these reforms make things better for men as well. I've talked to a lot of men who feel like they were bullied at work and nothing was done about the person who was bullying them. I know a lot of men who feel like their boss just had a real, like anger management issues, but, higher up viewed that person as, a real stellar performer. And so the toxic environment that they were creating for people under them was, excused and overlooked. And so I would say women, just because we're, a minority in the industry, when there are illnesses like that in the organization, we're kind of the first to really get sick. But that doesn't mean it's healthy for everyone else either, and so I like to remind everyone that doing things that make things better for women, make things better for disabled folks, make things better for folks that grew up not financially privileged, all these kind of things will really make things better for everyone.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So like, rather than improving the people who've been harmed, you have to improve the system as a whole to prevent it from happening again and kind of stop it from happening in the first place. And so I loved your guide online on how to create a more inclusive community within CS. And I found it so inspiring that you made multiple mentions of using the they, them pronoun as to not assume anyone's gender. Could you please tell me more about that?
Yeah, so that document, there's a reason I made it a Google Doc, which is instead of like a PDF that I distributed, which is that I want to keep adding things. And it started off focused on women and racial minorities within the United States. And then over time, people would say, well, what about this? And what about this? And so that was something that I really appreciate a colleague raising, is that more and more folks identify themselves as neither male nor female, but something else entirely, or in the middle, or just a different thing. And that they face a lot of barriers to feeling like they really belong in the classroom, or worrying that people will see this as kind of a phase or a fad rather than really who respecting that as who they are. So anytime I hear something like that, it's something that I want to add to the document and make part of our culture. And I will say, like, one of my very best friends who actually spent the entire day hanging out with yesterday, uses they, them pronouns. So it's a thing that I love learning about this stuff, because then these really cool people get added to my life that, you know, wouldn't be my friends and coworkers otherwise. So yeah, if anyone has any suggestions, always send them my way. And let me get to know you, because he's probably a cool person if you have a suggestion for that list. So
Super cool. Thank you so much. The next question. So you do a lot of work to make like the field of computer science and tech, like in classrooms, more inclusive. And I think when we talk about women and other minorities in the computer science community, the ideal scenario would be for the community to be as diverse as possible. So that would be the most inclusive. So let's say we did have this reality, let's say, you know, this goal was achieved. What do you think tech could do then to build social equity in a world where, you know, this is the norm?
yeah, so I will say, like, as far as, you know, what is the goal, what is the end state, part of it is I'm just very protective of, you know, people like my friend who uses they, them pronouns, you know, who also works in tech, by the way. And so there, it's a very, like, me as one person connecting to one person and wanting, you know, all these individuals to be comfortable and welcome in the workplace, because I care about them. But I think it's more than that, though. You know, in many ways, as tech workers, we're very, very privileged. Like, the pay is great compared to so many other industries. That you know, the style of work is, you know, you can get tendonitis in your wrist, but, you know, it's very different from farm labor or, you know, other things that can really destroy a body young, you know. So I would say, you know, this would not be a cause I would dedicate my life to if it was just like, let's take these relatively privileged white collar workers and make sure that their lives are, you know, removed of things that were making it uncomfortable. It's always a good thing to remove ways people are hurting, but that's not, I think, something I would devote this much of my life to. The reason I have is because of what was in your question, what comes out of Silicon Valley. So you look at, like, the influence that, for example, Hollywood has, and the kinds of movies that come out of, you know, this one tiny neighborhood of one city in the United States, and is consumed by billions of people around the world. And which stories get told and how they get told and how different characters in them are portrayed sets a tone and a culture for billions of people. So I think that's a good analogy where, yes, you want it, you know, individual writers and directors and actors in Hollywood to not face discrimination and to have good working conditions, and for that to be inclusive for the sake of people who work in Hollywood. But the real reason you would want to care about that is to have a diverse and inclusive and healthy environment there, is because of how that radiates out to everyone else. And tech is very much the same way. The products that we make ends up in the pockets of people around the world. The things that we make control how people work and sleep, and how police do their jobs, how militaries around the world do exert their powers, so you really almost need to think of people who work in tech as like this, UN, where it's really important that everyone has a seat at the table, and that impacts of these products on different people are well understood by decision makers, because representatives of groups are at the table. And it's so important to have that direct representation. I think empathy is a really important value. I could go on and on about how coding itself is an exercise in empathy, because you have to put yourself in the shoes of the computer and think how it thinks, not how we naturally think. But empathy only goes so far. And I would say there are a lot of misguided sort of want to be benevolent, but end up really harming the people they were meant to help, kind of attempts at tech out there, where people who don't belong to a community thought, I'm going to help, people by making such and such app, and it backfires in a way that they didn't anticipate, because they're not part of that community. So, and that's just the well-meaning ones. Then there are the outright attempts at exploitation and control and that kind of thing. So yeah, in the future, in the present, but continuing in the future, everything is controlled by software. And so we have to make sure that software is controlled by people and by the right people.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. It's so important, especially because tech is a field that affects everyone, like not just a certain group of people. So, what's a major lesson you learned from your time at Stanford? And what would be some of the traits you find in your most promising students?
Mm-hmm. The thing that strikes me most about, a couple of things about Stanford students. One is, when I accepted the job and was first arriving on campus, of course I expected the students to be really smart, really talented, and they were. That was a surprise. But I think part of me expected them to be sort of arrogant in proportion to their talent, and of course, it's never good to be arrogant out of proportion with your talent. But I expected them to at least be arrogant proportion to their very sizable talent. And what I found was a group of people who were so humble, so gracious, so the kind of arrogance and obnoxious self-promotion was just not part of the culture. And that really taught me an interesting thing about the most talented people tend to be a little understated. It kind of goes back to the question in the classroom. People who are really like flashing their tail feathers at you, it's like, those usually aren't the very best of talents. That, I have to say, you have to do a little self-promotion, especially women aren't always socially conditioned to do the kind of self-promotion that's necessary. So don't think you have to hide who you are or anything, but maybe what I mean is less about, not talking about what's good about yourself, but more also talking about what's good about others, of generosity, of sharing and promoting others, and looking always wherever you are, looking one step down on the ladder and saying, how can I take the people who are there and help them get up to where I am? And that's what I saw, a lot of that kind of graciousness of realizing, hey, you know, I'm lucky to be here. I've worked hard, but I'm also really lucky. And so let me see how I can share some of that luck. Was very much the attitude, and I really liked that. The other quality that that I noticed is just a very shortened distance between coming up with an idea for something to do and actually doing it. So this struck me the most when it was just in my first, you know, month or two at Stanford, and a student had come to my office hours just to introduce themselves and you know, get to know me or whatever. And we were chatting about how at the time they were applying for and interviewing for internships for the following summer. And I just kind of mentioned offhand, oh yeah, you know, at the university I worked before I came to Stanford, I taught this little workshop on, you know, how to do software interviews. And the student said, oh wow, you know, that would be really cool to have that here. And I said, you know, oh yeah, you know, that would be cool. But to me, it was just a little like idle chatter, you know, like, oh, that'd be cool, you know. So the next day, the student comes back to my office hours and says, okay, so I went to the registrar and I found out the process for creating a new course at Stanford, and here's the form that we have to fill out. And I went ahead and wrote up like a draft of the proposal, but I left some blanks where, you know, since you know, would only know how to fill in these details. And I hope it's not too presumptuous, but I went ahead and put together like the skeleton of a website for the course, you know, and like, and it was just like, here I am just sort of like, oh yeah, you know, I'm thinking like sometime in the next like 3 years, you know, I might have it on my to-do list to create this course. And the student just went from idea to like, here's the website and the forms in 24 hours, you know. And so, and it's not that it was an incredible amount of work. It was just, there is a drive in the most successful students to stop talking and thinking and just start doing. That continually astounds me. So, yeah.
I love that. So this was CS9, right?
Yes.
I took that course the very first time it was offered.
Well, you have that student to thank, because it would have not
you,
come about
yes,
for another
absolutely.
2 or 3 years after you had graduated.
That's
Had not been for
amazing.
that student.
Yeah, that's super cool, and it sounds like a great student community also, if that's the case. Okay, so I'm 18 now, but when I was 16, I was in an accident that I'm still sort of living with chronic health issues while recovering from, like chronic pain. And like as a student going through that, I just faced a lot of challenges and even some like ableism myself, which, you know, like you were saying about using like your hate sort of to fuel what you do next. So that's a lot of what motivates me towards working with like anti-ableism. So yeah, the recovery really opened my eyes up to also my privilege most of the time. So that's what motivated me. But I want to ask, are there any specific experiences which you would be willing to share that motivated you towards advocating for inclusivity of minorities in tech?
Yeah. Well, so one thing I can share is that actually was 1 week ago, 2 years ago, I was in a very bad bicycle accident, and you know, couldn't move. I broke 5 ribs, 3 vertebrae. smashed up a bunch of other bones. Anyway, so and then I had to go back to teach. And that first time back teaching, you know, I had mobility challenges. I also couldn't lift anything more than about 4 or 5 pounds. So so suddenly I couldn't get anywhere without a wheelchair ramp. I was not in a wheelchair, but I had to, because I couldn't lift anything, I had to pull like a suitcase with wheels for my laptop to give lecture. And one thing I found is that all the classrooms had wheelchair ramp accessibility for students. But the classroom that I had been assigned to teach in did not have any way to get onto the podium stage with a ramp. And that I thought was interesting, that we make assumptions about like, that are these kind of condescending attitude towards like, oh, we can help people who have disabilities, but that's us, like the normal folks, like being nice and helping them, with this implication that it's a them and that there's something sort of less than. I thought it's really symbolic that the power position in the room, it didn't occur to anyone that the person in charge of the class would have a disability, you know? And yeah, so that really resonates. Other experiences I had, I'm gonna have my own, just being a woman, you know, experiences of really inappropriate harassment from coworkers. And then of course, that any experience that I've personally had is going to be, you know, about this big of the piece of a much bigger pie. And so as I kind of talked about earlier, the way, you know, that I've grown in my understanding is just by being very intentional about seeking out, getting to know people who are very different from myself, and really listening to what is going on in their lives, what are the hardships that they face. You know, so there's actually another class that I created based on that. In fact, well, so the interview class came about originally because I was talking to a student who had become very close to, was, you know, one of my students that was really like a friend. And we were talking about their job search, and they mentioned, you know, oh, I'm not sure what to do about this. And it was a thing where I was like, wait, no, that's not how you approach an interview. No, wait. And they were really missing out on something that would have made their job search way easier. And that I sort of assumed everybody knew about. And that student said, well, you know, I'm the first person in my family, you know, generations to go to college, and no one in my family really has like white collar jobs, so much less tech. So yeah, you know, how was I supposed to know that? And I realized that the way that information was disseminating was informally. It's not the kind of thing that gets taught in a class. It's just the kind of thing that people share with each other in more informal network settings, and that a lot of students didn't have access to those networks, either through their parents or just because they both have, you know, kind of privileged backgrounds. Even as students, they would connect to each other more likely, and so on. So, so it was through having people in my life that I really had begun to see their struggle as my own, because I just cared about them as an individual, that these kinds of things, were coming to my attention. So, yeah.
Oh, that is so inspiring. So there's been a huge uproar post Timnit Gebru's firing from Google. So how can we reasonably expect young Black and brown women to feel that there's space for them in the world of CS when a researcher who's also a woman of color who was just voicing their concerns ended up being fired by one of the most important tech companies in the world?
Yeah. Yeah, that story is heartbreaking and angering in so many ways. In part because, this isn't just a worker voicing concerns, that was her job, was to identify concerns and spec them out in detail and suggest fixes. Like, what can be more discouraging than being fired for doing exactly what your job was supposed to be, So, yeah, and I understand she was speaking out more broadly than just, the issues with specific technologies, but also the environment that was at the company and so on. But even that I very much view as part of her job. We talk about, I've talked about, in this meeting, that the primary purpose of having diverse workforce is that the unique perspective that each person brings to the organization is this huge asset. Having people who can bring flag issues within the organization that might go unnoticed by anyone else because of that person's background, that's a huge value add to the organization. And so, so it is very frustrating to see that companies on the one hand are saying that they want that, and even putting in place, Google has many programs in place that are enacting that desire and bringing people on, but to see that and then also see at the same time that sometimes what those different perspectives have to bring to the table is something that the table didn't really want to hear, and yeah, I don't know that I have a positive spin on that. That story is just here's another cat, very discouraging. But I don't think that Timnit would want others to give up. So, so I think that has to be, something that that we remind ourselves, and that young women of color remind themselves, is that that I don't think that's what she would want coming out of this, and we just have to find more effective ways to organize. Right, there's it will always be challenging to be the lone voice in an organization, and so really coming together and many people acting and working together is the way to get things done. So so I think anyone who's feeling upset and discouraged by that, which is very understandable, that kind of hater is motivator action that you should be motivated to do is find a bunch of people like you, get organized, and make sure that you are watching out for each other and working together.
I think that's really good advice, especially for like as a young woman of color who's interested in tech. I think that's very good advice for sure. So this is the last question before me and Janani show you some of the projects we've been working on. But if you could go back in time and meet your younger self when you were a student at UC San Diego, is there any advice that you would give her?
I would tell her to sleep more. I don't know. Maybe that is also like a lesson that I really learned the hard way with the months and months, and really is not fully, probably will never fully happen, recovery from the bike accident, is just a new appreciation for physical health, which is something that at the time I just very much took for granted. That you know, pull 3 all-nighters in a row, sure, you know, like if I can physically do it, like I will, you know. And I think, you know, having a better sense of, okay, maybe you can, but is that a good idea? You know, long term and even in the short term, you know, just you're not doing your best work if your brain is not rested. Just physiologically, your mind and needs its own care, and your physical body is connected to the working of your minds in ways that cannot be separated. And I think and I know like a response people could say is like, oh, sure, it's easy for you now from a position of, you know, success to look back and say you should have not worked so hard, but maybe you only got where you are because, you know, you were working that way. So maybe the lesson really is like, oh, you know, when Cynthia was younger, she worked that way, so maybe I have to too. But I would actually really push back on that kind of conclusion. I look back and I see a lot of inefficiencies in how I was doing things that, you know, if I really like pulled an all night, I never did 3 all-nighters in a row, by the way, but but I did do a fair amount of one night all-nighters. And you know, and then the next day I was trashed, right? I wasn't getting anything done, or if I was, it was shoddy work because, you know, I'm just not all there. And so so I think there was a lot of harm, you know, to my health in the style of work that I had, but also I think actually I could have been even more successful at what I was doing if I had been more efficient and realized, you know, I could get that same task that took me 3 hours to do done in 1 hour if I had been rested and hydrated and fed well, you know. And so that's a big regret that I have, and I wish someone, you know, me as a time traveler could go back there and say like, let's rethink this style. But it was so glorified as part of the culture, right? That's how you really knew you were serious about computer science, is like doing this really difficult grind. And I just see that now as a very ineffective and short-sighted.
Yeah, I completely get what you mean, especially as someone who's like in like college last year of high school, but living in residential school and dealing with health challenges that I never did before. And I was like, oh, I can't work like this anymore. I wish I could, but I literally cannot. And I totally understand what you mean. I think that's very good advice, because I also saw how certain like habits that I formed, I'll probably continue after I recover as well. So I think that's very good advice.
Amazing. So I think this is the time that Zoe and Johnny are the most excited for. So Zoe, I'll share my screen and please walk through, Cynthia, what you've built. For everyone else here, this is a very immersive environment. Please jump in with questions. You all have my email. If you want suggestions on like how we can improve what we are building, that would be awesome. And we all want to build it together. So Zoe, can I share my screen?
Yes. Awesome.
Can you see it?
Okay. Yeah.
Amazing.
Awesome. Okay, so this is a project that I've been working on. It's called ZIAI, Zoe's Inclusive AI, so ZIAI. So ZIAI is a platform built with the aim of building empathy surrounding disability, primarily in able-bodied communities, but also as a resource for disabled people. So when you first visit the website, it starts with just defining ableism, ableist language, and sort of educating you on the correct terminology and how to be sensitive. And then following these definitions, there's an anti-ableist language check where you can respond to prompts asking about your everyday language that you may use while like texting a friend, like in the first example. So the website then evaluates whether your language uses any ableist words or phrases, and it explains why those words are considered ableist. So if you say like, it was insanely gorgeous, says maybe don't use insanely just to say it was like unbelievable, and suggest some alternatives. So there's a few like that. And then after that, there's some resources written by disabled folk that can help you become more aware and be a better ally. So these are stuff that I read through, and it's sort of connected with some of my experience, but also I learned a lot from. And it's very easy for someone who knows nothing about like ableism or disability to understand, which I think is really important. And then you have some like graphs also for awareness and some more resources and articles. The platform also includes an AI chatbot. So if you select a country from the list provided here, so let's say you say the US, the bot can then like tell you about laws in the country you selected that exist to like protect disabled people, like what they have to disclose to employers, what they don't, and so on. And then it can also tell you about whether an institution you're a part of is inclusive. Like if you're a professor or if you're a teacher, you're like, oh, how can I make this school that I work at more inclusive? It tells you how. So yeah, it gives you a checklist. And Manu, do you think I should read it out, or is it?
Sure, definitely. Anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, sure. So I'll just read out like one or two. So one is about like emergency exits being accessible, because we talk a lot about like getting into the building, but like what about getting out, right? And then there's one, I think, about like feedback, being open to feedback from disabled students and students who are dealing with chronic health issues, because you can say you're accessible and inclusive all you want, but if you aren't willing to listen to feedback, it doesn't really mean much. And then apart from that, yeah, so it's a few different things which you can check out if you're interested. And then after that, you can also like ask the platform to like guide you on how to support differently abled friends and family. So it'll like suggest resources similar to the ones on the dashboard. So yeah. And then you can also find employment opportunities in the country that you selected. So like jobs where you can like work from home, like it's a website, so it constantly updates. And like jobs where you don't have to wonder about, oh, is this inclusive? Because they're saying, hey, wheelchair accessible, you can do this, you can do this. So yeah, this was my first time working with computer science and learning about programming from Manu. And it really got me interested in using tech as a tool to talk about like awareness and activism, which I'm really passionate about. So that's pretty much it. I'd love to know your thoughts on it if you'd like.
I love it. I love how it combines a kind of exploration and self-reflection piece with okay, and here's all the concrete actions and resources, and how they're blended together in a useful way. And it sounds like you had a lot of fun with doing it. Like, oh sure, anyone can make like a list of links, but like let's make a chat bot. So I love how that brings in I don't know. There's something I think that just it makes a statement to put that in the language of tech, right? And demonstrate, here's who we are, and we have this vibrancy even to making tools for how to help our own communities. So I like that aspect of it.
Thank you.
Janani, should I share my screen?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So here we go. Let's just close this off. Yes, Janani. So someone is making a terrible mistake. How do we help them?
Right. So,
Okay.
so you just click on the extension.
First, let me
And
wait. Yeah.
so basically it's called the conscious consumer, and it's picked out, all of these harmful materials like leather, and it shows you like why leather is bad and why you shouldn't buy it, how it contributes to fast fashion. And it also recommends alternate websites where with sustainable products instead. So personally, I've always had like this problem, when you're shopping and then you want to shop sustainably, but it's hard. Like, you don't know where to go, you don't know what to find. And so you just usually take the most convenient option and go because it makes sense, right? So that's why I developed this extension. This was also my first like proper coding project, and I learned a lot from Manu, and I learned a lot about JavaScript as well. Yes,
and Jani has built her own corpus of materials. So any material that you pick and you click on it, and it will prevent you from making terrible choices. So fantastic. So yes, Cynthia, you want to say something? Sorry.
I was just gonna I liked how it was framed not only in terms of the environmental cost, but preventing you from making terrible fashion choices as well. So it's like, doesn't look good.
That's exactly it, right? I think, Cynthia, I've always found you to be easily among the most inspiring people I've ever met. And I hope that Zoe and Janvi saw that, and everyone else in the room saw that today, right? I think you are the voice of building an empathetic institution in computer science, one that is open to everyone. And I really hope that the kids that we spoke with today, like we continue Cynthia's work, right? Like the way impact happens is one person inspires 100 other people, and they inspire 100 other people, and so on and so forth, right? So with that said, Zoe, Janvi, any last words for Cynthia? Anything you want to say? I know, Cynthia, we're on time, but you don't mind we go for 5 minutes more? Is that okay? Yeah.
I just want to say, like, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us, and also just like look at our projects and give your opinion, because you're very successful, but also very inspiring, and we really value your input. So thank you so much. And I really liked a lot of your answers to the questions. Like, they really made me think, which I really appreciate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like, I learned so much from your talk today, and it was so inspiring to me, especially, as like a woman of color. It was really inspiring to see everything you've done and everything you're continuing to do.
Amazing. Anyone else wants to jump in with some final words? Anything you guys want to say? I guess everyone's just happy and content. So anything else, like, it would be amazing. Cynthia, thank you so much for making the time. I loved your answers as well. Especially, I think the things that I really resonated with is the idea of coding itself being an empathetic exercise, because you are coding on behalf of someone, which is fascinating. I loved your Hollywood answer, because I completely agree that the goal isn't to only just protect people who are tech workers, but to enable them to build tech that better serves the entirety of the world, right? And I really hope that everyone here in this room will continue that mission forward. And Cynthia, thank you. I know you're so busy. Thank you so much for making the time for all of us. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Happy to join. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining. Thank you so much.